Well, hello and welcome to the Cross to Bear podcast. I'm Phil Bear, I'm your host, and I am an evangelical Christian who has been involved in apologetics and theology and philosophy and all sorts of mischief for, oh my gosh, more years than I'm willing to actually admit. And I've been doing this for almost a year now, but not quite, and I've had some good response to it, and so we're enjoying this. And I've had lots of great guests. And tonight I have a guest from Free Thinking Ministries by the name of Josh Klein. So I'm going to go ahead and add him to the stage real quickly and say hello to Josh. Josh, hello.
Hey, Phil. How's it going?
It's going well. And we had a little bit of technical difficulties right before the start of the show, but we seem to be in good shape now. I don't know whether we're in ideal shape. Maybe next time it'll be better, but I think right now we're as good as we can be, and I think everything is going to work out all right. So thanks for being here, and do me a favor and give me a little bit of a background on yourself, and then also I wanted to see if you have the ability to go ahead and simulcast this on the Free Thinking Ministries channel. If you do, then go ahead and do that, and if you don't, then we can just record it and you can announce it for Free Thinking Ministries so people can watch it later.
Yeah, well, I wanted to simulcast it on the Free Thinking, but this was the first time I've ever streamed on StreamYard on my phone, so I have no clue how to use any of the things on my phone. So I don't know how to get to it if I were to try. So,
all right. Well, it might be on a It might be on a menu somewhere or something like that, but you can play with it if you want to. So this is part 3 in our series on Marx and Marxism and how Marxism is having an impact on our culture and our society. And I have written a book about this called Marx Attacks, and I want to invite anybody who hasn't come across my book yet to definitely check it out. You can get it on Amazon. Just go to Amazon and just do a search on Phil Bear. The name is right there spelled for you. And you can do either a search on my name or you can do a search on the book title and it'll come right up. And I wrote this book really at the behest of Dr. Tim Stratton. And this was not long after Tim and I actually became friends a few years ago. And so I outline one of the problems, I outline many of the problems that Marxism actually presents to our society, and its destructive nature just cannot be overstated. So you're invited to pick up that book if you haven't already. And tonight we're going to go through what I call the glossary of the new social justice gospel. And for those of you who don't know what a glossary is, it's basically a dictionary. I didn't learn that until kind of later than when I really should have learned it. So don't anybody be embarrassed if you're not real familiar with that term. But it's a dictionary of the social justice gospel, and it's how Marxism and the new version of Marxism has influenced our culture and has redefined a whole lot of words. And when we talk to someone in that persuasion, we can often believe that we're talking about the same thing, but the truth is we're really not talking about the same thing at all, because they have redefined a whole lot of terms. But before I do that, I want you to give me a little bit of background on yourself, Josh. I don't know if anybody who is watching has ever come across you before, and if they're not familiar with you, just do me a favor and give us a little background. Tell us who you are and what your background is and why you're here and why you do what you do.
Yeah, so I'm Josh Klein. I work for Free Thinking Ministries, have for about a little over a year now. So kind of when you started this podcast is probably about when I started at Free Thinking Ministries. But son of a pastor, and grew up in the ministry, and then went to Grace University in Omaha, to become a pastor, and I was in pastoral ministries for a little over a decade, specifically in youth ministry, and realized that a lot of kids are asking apologetics questions, but more like, how does culture fit in with this? Like, why can't I just love people the way I want to love people? That sort of stuff. And so that got me going down all sorts of rabbit holes for how to minister to kids and parents. About 2014, an event happened that started my journey into researching into like critical race theory and Marxism and stuff. You might know what event I'm talking about. It was Ferguson, Missouri. Michael Brown, hands up, don't shoot. You remember that? I was hearing a lot about systemic racism and that sort of thing, how I was part of the problem. And so what I did was I said, okay, well, I better study this. If I'm part of the problem, I better figure out why, right? And I didn't know much. I came from a small town and just wanted to serve the Lord. And so I kind of started delving into some stuff. And then ministry got a hold of me and kind of distracted me a little bit. And so I didn't know too much about it. I just knew I was skeptical of some of these things that people were saying, but I didn't know why. And then 2020 hit, which was another seminal moment in the critical race theory of our nation with George Floyd. And I remember I had gone down this path of saying, I don't believe in this critical race theory stuff. I'm not sure why, but when I compared what they're saying with scripture, it doesn't jive. It doesn't mix. And so I did a deep dive. So I went into source material, studied Marxism, and started to come out realizing, oh, this is just an offshoot of Marxism with a different oppressor framework rather than a materialistic dialectic with a different. And so that's my background in Marxism. And I realized that the whole goal is to tear down the system that we're currently in, the American Western system. And so I messaged Tim and said, hey, I want to write a little bit for your website. Would that be okay? And he said, sure. We knew of each other just a little bit. So the first article I wrote was the separation of church deception on Free Thinking Ministries website, where basically I said, we've been deceived. Actually, the first article I wrote was on the movie Cuties, but the second article was the separation of church deception. And I wrote about how we have been duped as the church to avoid politics because we think separation of church and state means the state shouldn't be influenced by the church, but the separation of church and state actually means that the church shouldn't be influenced by the state, and we have it exactly backwards. And Christians who don't realize that are abdicating the responsibility in the public square. And then one thing led to another, and Tim was like, hey, you should just do this full time. You're good at it. We're a good team. Let's do it. And so that's kind of what brought me here.
Great. Yeah. Well, actually, Marxism is what started my friendship with Tim Stratton, because Tim was...
So it's good for something.
It is. It's good. Yeah. Maybe that was God using bad things and bringing good out of bad or something. Yeah. I heard that there was something about that in the Bible, but I don't remember what it is.
Yes.
And Tim was talking about critical theory in a conversation with a friend of mine by the name of Paul Blanchard. And Paul Blanchard and I go back decades and decades. And Tim was talking about critical theory as though it was a worldview and as though it was an ideology. And so I just kind of interrupted the conversation, and I said, Tim, you got a little bit of an inaccuracy going on here, and that is that critical theory is not a worldview, it's not an ideology, it's not something that makes rational truth claims. Critical theory is actually a methodology, and it's a mind virus that is designed to bring about a certain result. It's designed to evoke rage and resentment, and then to stimulate activism based on that rage that it provokes. And so it's more of a weapon than it is an idea. So Tim was intrigued by that, and so Tim and I did a series of Marxism podcasts. This was probably like somewhere around 2020, so like 4 years ago or something like that. And at the time, there was a big kerfuffle about how Marxism is influencing our society, and all of these issues that people didn't realize were related to Marxism were just blowing up in everybody's faces in the 2020 election. Actually, in the 2016 election, they were blowing up in people's faces, but they were also blowing up in people's faces in the 2020 election, because this battleground is necessary. This battleground is rearing its ugly head again, and it is really essential to what we're going through, what we're facing right now, because the Democratic Party is saturated with neo-Marxism or cultural Marxism, and it uses critical theory on a daily basis, on a routine basis. And so if people don't understand critical theory, then they're not going to be able to deal with it. If Christians don't understand critical theory, they're not going to be able to confront it, and they're not going to be able to stop it. And the reason that I always tell people that critical theory is not a worldview is because critical theory doesn't make any truth claims about reality. Critical theory sends messages to the subconscious mind that are designed to enrage people and to generate resentment. It's telling them messages. It's giving them messages that they are oppressed, especially minorities. That minorities are being oppressed, and the reason for all the disadvantages and all the hardship in your life is because the evil Iquinsuocha, the white devil, is oppressing you. And if you want to be emancipated from all this oppression, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to attack the roots of that oppression, which is Western civilization. And so it's not about making truth claims about reality. It's about changing reality. It's bringing about revolution through a mind virus that is brainwashing people into thinking that they are being oppressed, and that this class oppression, this class struggle, is actually occurring in the 21st century, and they are the victims. So it's victim culture and victim mentality, and it's actually very insidious. And I explained something in the book. I've got a chapter on critical theory in the book, and I explain how critical theory is designed to brainwash people and to turn them into what Marxism traditionally would call a useful idiot. And I'm not saying that people who accept or who are triggered by the messages of critical theory are idiots. But what I am saying is that Marxism is treating them as though they are idiots. It's exploiting them. It's exploiting their resentment, and then trying to get them to tear down Western civilization because of that resentment, in order so that it could be replaced by a new order, a new social order that's built on Marxist ideals instead of Western principles. So yeah. we hear all sorts of terms like Donald Trump is a racist, and so is a racist, and then we have systemic racism in our society, and racism is built into the DNA of our society, which is what Obama said several years ago. Racism is just built into our DNA, and so there's this huge push to get rid of racism, and the only way to get rid of racism is to tear down the civilization that all these racists actually built.
Yeah, and if you read the source material, it's plain. It's plain as day. They don't hide the ball. Derek Bell says, racism is ordinary. You need to defeat whiteness, and whiteness isn't my skin. Whiteness is an ethereal, nefarious force that must be defeated. And so, how do you do that? Well, you have to tear down all the hegemonic structures. Right? You'll hear the word structures. The white power structures. Well, it seeps, like you said, seeps into the subconscious to where it becomes what I call it grievance ministry. Like you are doing ministry only through grievance, and the only way you can get out of it is if you so there's no redemption in critical theory. There's only retribution. So
Right.
you have to embrace it, embody it, and then exact retribution on the people who don't agree with you, which is why they can synthesize and use all sorts of what look like conflicting ideas, like LGBTQs for Palestine, right? that's that's a conflicting idea, but the whole point is that it's conflicting. The
Right.
whole point is that, well, the only reason we conflict is because we have to tear down the system that we both are saying oppresses us. So
Right.
they don't even care about the logical tension, because that has no bearing on their goals.
No, logic is racist, reason is racist, math is racist, and evidence is racist, and so that's what makes this so difficult. I told Tim in one of the podcasts that we did a few years ago, you cannot stop an argument. Not an argument. You cannot stop a bullet with an argument. And what we're dealing with is a weapon. And the only way that you can deal with a weapon is through countermeasures. You can't deal with it through counter arguments, because counter arguments don't mean anything. They're absolutely useless when it comes to dealing with critical theory. So you can't stop a bullet with an argument. You have to stop measures with countermeasures. And that's why it's so important for Christians to understand the nature of critical theory. If we don't understand it, we're going to get slammed. We're going to absolutely get slammed.
Yeah. And that's why understanding these words that we're going to go through are so important, because a lot of them sound good, but they've been completely redefined.
Right.
Tim and I break out some of that in our moral obligation to vote for an immoral candidate. I wrote the part on Marxism just has new skin, and I talk about how if you look at executive orders on equity and diversity, equity, and inclusion, those are designed to tear down the system. They're not designed to help people. And
Right.
coming from our executive.
This is not about reform. I want everybody to understand this. Every Christian needs to understand that Marxism and critical theory and cultural Marxism and the whole woke ideology is not about reform. I want you to put that on your refrigerator. I want you to put it in cross stitch. It's not about reform. It's about revolution.
Mm-hmm.
It's extremely important that people understand that. If they don't, again, these are things that if we get wrong, then we're going to be in big, deep trouble. We may be in deep trouble as it is. But if we get them wrong, we're going to make serious mistakes, and we can't afford to make those kinds of mistakes when it is trying to reshape our entire society, our entire culture, our entire civilization. And individual freedom is going to get lost. And I can guarantee you that this is tightly related to the current presidential election and a lot of the elections in the Senate, in the House, in the federal government right now, because these people are Marxists. Don't make any mistake. These people are Marxists, and they are fully entrenched in Marxist ideology. And if they are able to get their policies enacted, then they're going to destroy, they're going to erode our freedom, and they're going to erode human dignity like nothing you've ever seen before. Mm-hmm. And what's going to get replaced by that is something that is far from equity as you can possibly get. It's going to be moral evil on a biblical scale, and I don't think I'm overstating the case when I say that.
Yeah, and we're not just talking about abortion, right? Because that's, people go, well, everyone's pro-choice, like each side's pro-choice, and I said, yeah, but only one is actually trying to institute a completely different type of government without so much as touching the Constitution. And I never thought, honestly, I'd see the day where we would have two overt Marxists on the opposing ticket, and people don't realize it. Classical. Tim Walz and Kamala Harris are classical Marxists. They're not just cultural; they are cultural Marxists too. But the policies, like wanting to enact taxes on unrealized capital gains, that's a strategy to move our fiscal policy and our means of production to the public sector away from the private sector. That's what it's designed to do. And she was just dumb enough to say it out loud. But most of these people keep it close to the vest. They're just looking for a moment. And if people think that our system is robust enough, I think our system's very robust. But you have to understand that if they get a simple majority in the Senate, it's very easy to upset the apple cart without touching the Constitution. All you need to do is nuke the filibuster, usher in Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. as states, pack the Supreme Court, and boom, you're done. You've got a single party majority for the rest of time. People don't realize that because they don't. Oh, no, surely they wouldn't do that. I think they would.
They would absolutely do it. And there was something that occurred in 2008 that I think escaped notice for a lot of people. And it was when Barack Obama said, we're going to fundamentally transform the United States of America.
Yeah, change was his motto. Yep.
And I think there are very precious few people who understood what he was saying. Precious few people understood what he was saying. He was talking, he was literally endorsing a fundamental redefinition of the United States of America, a fundamental transformation. He wasn't kidding when he said that. That wasn't just a campaign slogan. That was his intention, and that is the intention of the Democratic Party in general. And they are going to accomplish that agenda if people don't understand that the rhetoric they used is designed to deceive people. And that's why it's so important for us to talk about what we're going to talk about tonight. So I want to get to that, and I just want to mention real quick that this glossary of the social justice, or dictionary of the new social justice gospel, is one of the chapters in my book, Marx Attacks. And so if you want to get a reference to it, you can get the book and you'll have it recorded there for you. But I keep updating it. And my guess is, Josh, you're going to probably think of terms that I have left out. And if you do, then absolutely feel free to include them and to add them. And if you don't mind, I can go add them to the list, and I can update the book with them as well, because I'm sure that there are a lot of them that I've left out and that I've forgotten about. So there are so many of them. It's just
that's not your fault, because they're doing it with new terms every day. I mean,
right.
They're purposely taking words and ideas and reshaping them to fit an ideology, but to fit the weapon, as you would say, to cudgel people into accepting the movement.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we have a real quick comment here. I heard my name, that slam RN, because I used the word slam, and so it is depressing to think about. Sometimes I just wish that all this would go away and that I could just ignore it all and go along with my life, but it's going to have an enormous impact on our society and on our children. That's one of the things that I'm concerned about, because I have two daughters, and they're going to inherit a much different world if we're not careful. So I'm going to put this up on the screen, and I'll just read the introduction. I'll just go through the introduction real quick. The glossary of the new Marxist social justice gospel. And by the way, the reason I call this the gospel is because critical theory and Marxism, the ideology of Marxism and the mind virus of critical theory have invaded the body of Christ, have invaded the Church of Jesus Christ. So now believers are beginning to be brainwashed by this ideology, and they are beginning to confuse social justice as it's defined in our society today with the real gospel. And that is one of the things that concerns me more than anything about all of this. It's not just the transformation of our society and our government, it's also, and our economy, it's also the transformation of the church. And so every Christian in the world needs to read my book or read a book on this, needs to get informed about this, and we need to expose how this mind virus has invaded the body of Christ, and we need to be able to stop it. And the problem is that once you've been infected by this mind virus called critical theory, it is almost impossible to extract it and to eliminate it, to eradicate it from someone's mind. When you bring up these issues and try to tell them that this is a lie and that these things are not true, that they are designed to tear down Western civilization that's built on a foundation of the Christian faith and the Christian worldview to a massive extent, they will get red-faced angry. And they will begin to screech. They will begin to screech like demons if you try to expose this stuff. They do not want it exposed. And the influences, I believe this is an absolute demonic influence in our society. And it has taken over the minds of a lot of Christians. And if you try to eradicate it, then you will end up beating the bee's nest. And you're the hornet's nest, and you're gonna have a problem. You're gonna have a crisis on your hands. But people have to be confronted with this stuff. So for those of you who would like a handy glossary of the terminology of the new Marxist social justice gospel, which should replace any commitment to the original outdated gospel of Jesus Christ, and should be accompanied by throwing your Bible in the trash can since it's no longer needed, here is the definitive guide in alphabetical order. So here we go. And what I want to do is I want to bring up these terms, and then I want to give you what my social justice gospel definition is, and then I want you to comment on it. Josh, tell me if you think that I've got it, I'm inaccurate in some way, and then just add whatever you want to add to this in order to help clarify and so on. So the Bible is a collection of books containing primitive myths and stories. You can interpret it any way you want to, as long as your interpretation supports social justice ideology. Otherwise, it's worthless and irrelevant. And this goes to the idea that social justice is becoming the gospel for a great many Christians these days. They don't know the difference because social justice sounds like the gospel to them. And the reason that it sounds like it is because of all these other terms that are being rammed down people's throats. And so social justice can be made to sound so attractive, and it can be made to sound so good that people confuse it with the gospel itself, the real gospel.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there, and I think the way you look at the Bible is a collection of books. It does contain, the way that they would look at the Bible, it does contain myths and stories, but the interpretation is mostly through that Marxist oppressor framework. That's what the gospel is about. Jesus came to set the oppressed free. Well, in the social justice realm, does the name James Cone mean anything to you, Phil? Do you know who that is?
James
Cone.
I've heard of it. I'm not sure I'm familiar with the name.
So he was a liberation theologist in the 50s and 60s, I think, and he really played a big role. People don't realize how big of a role he actually played in importing this social justice theology. In his book on God, I don't remember what the book is called off the top of my head now. I think it was Social Justice in the Gospel. I think that's the name of the book. But basically what he says is white people need to repent of their whiteness before they can repent of their sins. That's not a direct quote, but that's basically, so that's the redefinition. The gospel is first tearing down the hegemonic power, the oppression isn't sin. The oppression is the authority of the hegemonic power of the West. And so
Right.
Jesus is a figure that actually supplants that and is a subversive social justice warrior. He's hippie Jesus, right? And so
Right.
I think that's exactly right.
And real quickly, I want you, if you don't mind, just very briefly give us a definition of hegemony, because I think a lot of people might not be familiar with that word.
Oh yeah, that's basically what it means is the group that has the social power over an entire system. So like the United States would be the like kind of the global hegemon of all the countries in the world, because we have the power. We can kind of wield the culture if we wanted to, and so it's not necessarily a term that's all of these are not necessarily a term that's evil or wrong. But when you say, well, the people with hegemonic power, that means structural power, social power, are the white people. It doesn't
Right.
matter if you're under a mudslide in North Carolina, in Appalachia. You have part of that hegemonic power, and so you must be defeated. You're part of that system. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And the way that I simplify it is that hegemony is basically the group that has the greatest influence in society. It's a very simple way to put it, and I think it can help people, kind of get past the little bit of a block where that I've never heard that word before. So
yeah.
What's the definition of capitalism? Greed. And by the way,
that's right.
one of the things that is interesting about Marxism and critical theory is that a lot of the terms in critical theory are not necessarily terms that have a specific rational definition. They are terms that people draw from a social memory, and that can have a psychological effect on people. So when you tell someone that the people they work for are greedy, then that can have a psychological effect, and that can tend to provoke activism in order to try to bring down the structure that these businesses represent. And so it's confusing, because we say that critical theory is not an ideology, that critical theory is a methodology. People get confused by that because they hear terms that they find extremely familiar, and and sometimes people will tend to try to process those terms in a rational sense. And so, but what's really happening for people that are the target of critical theory is that they think that they are hearing a rational term, but they don't realize that what's happening is that they're being affected psychologically by what they think is a rational term, and that rationality is not its purpose, even though that could be an illusion that it's going to produce in the minds of the people who are influenced by it.
Yeah. Well, and capitalism itself is a word kind of coined in Marxist thought. I like to use the word free markets, as because global capital is just the goods, right? So you have goods to buy and sell and trade. But capitalism is saying that all you care about is accruing all of the capital for yourself.
Right.
And
the other thing. The other thing is that it's true that capitalism is about everyone looking out for their own separate interests. Now, that's definitely true of capitalism. And so when people hear, well, in capitalism, everybody is looking out for their own interests, and that's what drives capitalism, and that's what motivates people, is self-interest, they think, well, if self-interest is motivating people, then that must be greed. But the problem is that self-interest is not necessarily greed. I would define greed as expecting to receive more than you deserve or more than you have earned. That's what greed is. Capitalism is not expecting to receive more than you have earned. Capitalism is wanting to keep what you've earned and wanting to be the steward of what you earned. So capitalism is about stewardship. It's not about greed. And stewardship is a good thing. In fact, there are some biblical passages that I could cite if we had more time that I think support this idea of looking out for and providing for your own household and so on.
And I think
that's.
I think isn't it Thomas Sowell who said, "Why is it greed when I want to keep the money I earned, but not greed when I want the money you earned to go to me?"
Right.
When you put it that way, and people are greedy. That's true, but you don't get rid of greed by changing a system. You get rid of greed by changing a heart, right?
And the other thing is that normally people think that corporate CEOs make so much money, and so that means that they're greedy. And Thomas Sowell was also instrumental in addressing that issue, and he said, I could be the greediest man in the world, and it's not going to add a single penny to my income or to my assets. So so that's where capitalism stands in this whole ideology. But I want to get to the term class, and what I'm really going to do here is I'm going to talk about what class is as far as the advocates of critical theory are concerned. So this is a quote from Herbert Marcuse, which is one author that I think everybody should read if they want to understand modern neo-Marxism and critical theory and social justice, for that matter. But cultural Marxism, if you want to understand cultural Marxism, Herbert Marcuse is definitely one of the authors that I would recommend. He says this: the class is the actual social and economic unit, not the individual. It achieves an independent existence over against the individuals, so that the latter find their conditions of existence predestined and hence have their position in life and their personal development assigned to them by their class and become subsumed under it. The personal individual becomes a class individual, and his constituent properties become universal properties that he shares with all other members of his class. His existence is not his, but that of his class. And that's why you will hear people say, if you are white, you are a racist, period. You don't have to know anything about any given white person to know that they are racist. Because they're racist because they are part of the white class, and the white class is defined by being racist. And so that's what Marcuse is talking about. And that comes from the book Reason and Revolution, Hegel and the Rise of Social Theory, page 295. So it's extremely important to understand. Now, this goes back to original Marxist ideology that is about class struggle in economic categories. But that class struggle has been translated into cultural and social categories in the new neo-Marxism, in the new cultural Marxism. So do you have anything that you want to add to that or comment on for that?
No, I think you hit that. The only thing I would add is I think people get confused by this because we use terms like middle class, upper class, lower middle class. We use that as far as economic terms, and to say, but the idea is people think that middle class in the United States means you're always middle class, that there is no movement up and down in what we call classes. So the interesting thing is Marxism claims to want to eliminate class, but free market economies actually achieve the ability to mobilize in class, which is much better for people to be able to move up and down in certain, classes in a free market are just income distribution levels, like where you fit. So you can move up and down in those. You can see rich people that had $1 million that were upper class. I heard a story of a professional football player wasted all of his money, professional basketball player for the Lakers, ended up being homeless, wasted all of his money. Well, now he's in the lower class, but he was in the upper class. Right. So what you want is that mobility. The irony is that all classes are fixed in Marxism, both culturally and fiscally. So you can't move. Everything's fixed, and so you must destroy those that are above you. And so that's all I would add to that.
Right. Yep. Okay, the next one is the elect. So we're talking about a new gospel here. And the elect are all the believers in the Bible, but in the new cultural Marxist ideology, the elect is all people of color, excluding whites. And 2, all non-traditional sexual and gender deviants. So the elect is a special class of people who are woke and who have all the moral capital in this class system. And all the people who have the moral capital are the people of color. And the reason, what gives you moral capital is the fact that you're oppressed. That's it. You don't have moral capital because of your character or your integrity. You have moral capital because of your class. Remember, you're not a class individual, or you're not a personal individual. You're a class individual now. And so all the people who are morally upright and have moral virtue are those who are the oppressed. And oppression is where you derive your moral status from.
Yeah. I think it's important to note also with this one is that you can actually move into the white category of the non-elect if you don't buy into the system. So you can have internalized white supremacy. So if you're if you're Larry Elder, for example, if you know who Larry Elder is, if you're Thomas Sowell, they have internalized white supremacy. They have been duped, and they are no longer one of the elect. So it's funny because they want to boil everything down to skin color, but what they can do is they can shove so they can say, no, all people of this ethnicity are oppressed, and you go, well, what about so and so? And they go, oh no, he's just your token. He's got internalized white supremacy, and usually it's a 51-year-old middle-aged woman saying that about a black man, which seems kind of racist to me. But what do I know?
That's right. Yeah, you don't know anything. All right. The next one is equality. And this has several definitions. First, the belief that men and women are identical and interchangeable in every way and on every level. 2, the belief that the only difference between men and women is their anatomy, which is irrelevant in every way and on every level. 3, everyone in every arbitrary class making exactly the same income as all other classes regardless of any other social or economic factors. So equality means equality of outcome. Everybody has to make the same amount of money generally. Everybody has to be in everyone has to have the same social or economic achievement. And I really shouldn't say achievement. What I should say is that they get what they want because everything is redistributed. Equality in economic Marxism is you redistribute wealth to everyone so that everyone's wealth is relatively even, regardless of no matter how hard they work, no matter what their interests are, and so on. 4, giving unquestioned, unconditional credence to all forms of sexual expression or lifestyles, regardless of whether they are healthy, sustainable, or moral in the traditional sense. And the reason that I bring up the sexual aspect of this is that in Marxism, in cultural Marxism, if you are an LGBT person, if you are same-sex attracted, you are oppressed. Everyone in society is oppressing you, and especially white people, white, cisgender, male, Christian, they are oppressing you because they object to the moral status of homosexuality. And what we would do as evangelical Christians is we would differentiate between the sin and the sinner. We would say homosexuality is a sin, and homosexuality is destructive and is harmful to the people who practice it. But we do not say that the homosexual the persons, that they are somehow evil people. So, but if you say to someone homosexuality is wrong, and they are a homosexual, then you are attacking them, you're oppressing them, you're being unloving toward them. Whereas the truth is that if a Christian points out that someone is a homosexual and that that's going to be harmful to them and that it's a sin against God, that's actually an act of love to point it out and to try to get them out of homosexuality, to try to get them out of that practice. But if you try to explain that to someone who has been brainwashed by this ideology, it'll sound like gibberish to them. You cannot love someone. You cannot love someone and tell them that their lifestyle is evil at the same time.
And they'll say that outright. I mean, I just finished reading a book called The Widening of God's Mercy by Richard and Christopher Hayes. That's basically the premise of the book. Is in the book they say you can't really love somebody if you're not affirming what they do or who they love.
Right.
Ironically, they don't put any safeguards on that, so everything's up for grabs. Pedophilia, polyamory, incest. If you don't put
bestiality.
Bestiality. If you don't put any safeguards up, and to your point, the equality aspect of equal pleasure. We all need to be able to experience sexual pleasure. We just have to. If you deny yourself equally. And so if you deny yourself sexual pleasure, that's a problem with the system. If they're denying you sexual pleasure, because sex, we need all of that. And then the second thing is what you said about health. Again, another word they're going to redefine in this instance. It's all about how I feel is what is healthy to me. So we even see that with body positivity, right? Where somebody's 350 pounds, 5'3", 300 pounds, and they go, "Oh no, we need the body positivity movement. How I feel about myself is what makes me healthy." Right. Which of course is bizarre and ridiculous. But once you buy into that, you're offended if anybody says otherwise.
Right. Yeah. And telling someone that they're unhealthy because they're overweight is not unloving. That's a concern about their health, and that's an objective concern about their health. And it's no more an attack on them than if a doctor says to someone, "You have cancer." If a doctor says you have cancer, he's not impugning your moral character. He's simply telling you that you have a problem that needs to be eradicated in order for you to be healthy. But again, we're being reasonable, and if we're being reasonable, we're being racist, and so we don't need. No one needs to listen to us. Yeah.
So when people think this doesn't have downstream effects, this is what is to say, the reason euthanasia becomes popular in systems like this is directly linked to this Marxist idea of personal mental health. When we talk about mental health in an objective sense, it's good to think well of yourself, to be able to do well, that's good. But this mental health in the self-actualization sense, which is a direct stream from cultural Marxism, invites people to say, "I'm so oppressed because I'm sick and I'm worthless, so I should be able to kill myself." And then society says, "Yeah, you should be able to." So this has real life consequences. Canada is letting people kill themselves right now because of this.
Right. Yep. And that's no surprise because Canada has become a socialist dictatorship just in the last few years.
Absolutely.
So, number 5, absolute parity. Now we're talking about equality here. This is the word we're redefining. Number 5, absolute parity in all outcomes in life and society, including but not limited to incarceration rates, death penalty quotas, standards of living, representation in all institutions of society, government, business, and personal life. Note, equality in all its forms, objective or subjective, should be artificially maintained through government force if necessary in all circumstances and conditions, and lack of it should be dealt with harshly and swiftly no matter what its cause may be, and all real causes of inequality must be ignored and replaced with the single cause of wealthy white oppression and privilege. Now, that was a mouthful.
Yeah. It almost feels like you pulled it right out of Ibrahim Kendi, to be honest with you.
Well, actually, I came up with this long before I ever heard of Ibrahim Kendi. But that's because of his. That's partly because of his influence, but it's also partly because all Ibrahim Kendi is doing is he's just regurgitating what he's already hearing in the culture anyway. You know, he's just popularizing all these things and making money going out on the speaker circuit and the book circuit, and making money off of just echoing things that everybody's already saying and people have already been saying for a long time. You know, so
and changing his name to sound more ethnic. I don't think his real name is Ibram. I can't remember what it is, but it's not Ibram.
Yeah, I don't remember either. Yeah, it's not Ibram. Yeah. No, it isn't. Yeah. So the only thing I want to say about this is that people talk about systemic racism in our society, how racism is built into the very systems of our society, built into our DNA, as Barack Obama put it. And when I ask people what the evidence is of systemic racism, what they'll give me is socioeconomic disparities and inequality, basically. What they're saying is if there wasn't systemic racism, if there wasn't racism that was rampant in our society, then there wouldn't be the kind of inequality that we see in our society. So since we do have this inequality, which is basically socioeconomic disparities, since we do have this inequality, then we must be a racist society. And the problem is that socioeconomic disparities are not evidence of inequality or oppression or racism. They're simply natural in society. And that's one of the things that I've learned from Thomas Sowell is that disparities in income, in education level, in economic performance, in educational performance, in social status, unevenness in all of those metrics is natural. That's what all societies exhibit. It's simply a reality. It's simply a fact of life. Not everybody is interested in the same things. Not everybody is interested in the kinds of vocations that are going to make a lot of money. Some people are interested in vocations that make less money. But if they don't make the same amount of money, if they don't have the same, if they're somewhere different on the economic scale from one another, then Marxism says, well, there must be some kind of oppression going on. There must be some kind of injustice. It's not unjust. And all these disparities are the result of injustice. And it is simply nonsense, but people will believe it because it has such emotional appeal that it's almost impossible to resist it when people hear it.
Yeah. I mean, just you think about it. If you tell people, it's not your fault. You were born in a system that hates you, and there's nothing you can do to get out of it. In a way, that's disempowering and frustrating. But in another way, it's relieving because now I just have people to blame, and I don't have to do any of the work myself. And then what happens is when you do that, you can garner power to yourself. You can get groups of people and say, none of you have the agency. What you need is to put me in power, and then I can change the world for you, right? And it's really insidious because what it does is one of the things, work is not a product of the fall. When God created man and woman, He put them in the garden to work. We're supposed to work. We're supposed to earn by working, not earn salvation, but just that's part of human dignity. That's part of how God created us. Right. And the insidious nature of this is to say, but you shouldn't have to work to get out of the situation you're in. You should I will do it for you. I will look at the people who say pay their fair share. And just a reminder, when they say pay their fair share, what they mean is get rid of all of your money. That's the fair share. That's not, they're not saying, well, if the rich would pay just, 90% of the taxes, although the top 5% of earners pay 100% of all federal income tax. People don't realize that.
Right.
When they say fair share, they mean, no, you need to share all of your goods so we can make it fair. That's what they mean.
Right. Yeah. And this is all based on collectivism. Collectivism is at the root of Marxism. And collectivism is the idea that we are not individuals, that the state is greater than the individual. And in the American experiment, it's the opposite. The individual is greater than the state. So, but I want to go on. Evangelical Christian. The definition of that is a hateful, racist, arrogant, narrow-minded, fundamentalist, oppressive, stupid person. and I, believe me, I have been treated as though I am an absolute arrogant, narrow-minded, stupid person. I'm treated as though I am an absolute imbecile. And it's just,
what do people always say, right, Phil? That they do this to me too. They say, "Oh, you're stupid. You don't understand Marxism."
Right.
Every single time.
Yeah, exactly. And the truth is, I understand it better than the people that I'm talking to do. But you cannot reason with someone whose mind has been overthrown by this Marxist ideology and by critical theory. Evidence. One, this is primarily a meaningless term. If it does have any meaning, it has no place in the new gospel of social justice. Two, evidence is what misguided white oppressors ask for when you preach the new gospel of social justice, but for which you will decline to provide, see definition 1, and treat them as though they are evil, racist, and oppressive for even asking for it in the first place.
Can I add a number 3 there?
Yes.
Number 3 is
if you have that evidence, if you have enough evidence for it.
I think number 3 is anything a minority person has experienced that can be interpreted as racist or oppressive.
Right.
So it's anecdotal, and this is what we call standpoint epistemology, right? Where
right. Yep.
From my standpoint, I learn, and you can't argue. So that's why the term's lived experience. You can't argue with my lived experience. This is why I tell people when they're going to share the gospel, the real gospel, not this gospel, when they're going to share the gospel, I've heard people say while they're sharing the gospel, you can't argue with experience, and I've experienced God in my own life. And I've told kids, students, I said, don't use that line of argument because it's bad. You can say you've experienced God in your life, but that does not. People can argue with experience because my kid has an experience that they saw a shadowy figure in their closet that they think is a monster, and they're convinced of that experience. And if I can't argue with that experience, that means that can be their truth, right?
Yep.
But I can argue with that experience because I know it's not true. I can investigate and argue. So when we say things like you should believe in Jesus because I've experienced his power and you can't argue with experience, we're actually playing with the same exact rubric. And experience is powerful, but it's not authoritative.
Right.
And so that's the third thing. But it's only experiences of oppressed people. If you've experienced anything as a white person, that your standpoint epistemology doesn't matter at all because you are compromised. It's only if you're part of the out group, the oppressed group, the other group. And it's only if you'll parrot the same talking points, right? So I remember. Do you know the rapper Lil Wayne? He got in hot water, I think, like 5 years ago for saying he's never experienced racism in his life. And people, everyone got so mad at him. He's like, well, I don't know. Like, look at me. I'm rich and I'm wealthy. I'm black. Right. I just haven't experienced racism. I'm fine. Maybe someone else has. Well, now he doesn't fit. So he doesn't get to count his experience. So it's all confirmation bias. It's begging the question. Number 3 is your evidence can count as long as it parrots the social justice narrative, and as long as it's from the standpoint of somebody who is in that outgroup.
Right. Yep. And I know sons and daughters of Christian friends who will tell me that they are being oppressed, and that the reason that they don't make very much money, the reason they can't get the job they want, is because of racism. And I can't argue with that, because that's their experience. That's how they perceive not being able to get a job, and that's the cause that they perceive as not being able to get a job and not being able to make the kind of money that they want, not to get into the school that they want to get into. And if I try to explain to them, it's not your experience that's telling you that. This is your interpretation of your experience. And you have to be willing to doubt your own interpretation of your experience. But when I say that, it falls on deaf ears. Mm-hmm. Because that actually, and not everybody is like this, but that often broaches the issue of personal responsibility, and no one wants to assume personal responsibility under a cultural Marxist framework, because I'm not responsible for what's happening to me, somebody else is, and so I get to blame someone else. And as long as I can blame someone else, then I can have this feeling of moral superiority, and it's almost like a drug. So, let's go on to faith. 1, absolute blind belief in and unquestioned obedience to the Marxist ideology of social justice, identity politics, systemic racism, white privilege, white guilt, and multiculturalism. Number 2, the opposite of evidence in its former meaning. So if you have faith, then you're going to believe in the social justice gospel, and that is the evidence that you have faith. And they have borrowed this from biblical terminology and from a biblical ideology and a biblical paradigm like you wouldn't believe, almost word for word. Because the fact that you believe in systemic racism and white privilege and white guilt, and the fact that you're oppressed and so on, that to them is the evidence that you have faith.
Yeah. And can I? Yeah, I just want to say that this is spot on, because this is part of the reason this has taken over evangelicalism in a lot of ways already, and it's part of the reason I do what I do, because recent reports that 60% of self-described evangelicals between the ages of 18 and 40 believe that Jesus is not the only way to salvation. Well, why is that? It's because their faith is built on this definition, which includes multiculturalism, which means that there has to be multiple ways to God if they believe in a God.
Right.
So it robs the gospel of its power and effectiveness. It devalues the cross. It eliminates the need for the resurrection. And it tells people that they can believe whatever they want to believe, so long as it falls in line with the oppressor framework.
Right. And also, for anyone that is listening who has never heard the term multiculturalism before, multiculturalism is essentially the idea that all cultures are equal in terms of their moral attributes. That there's no such thing as a moral practice in a given culture that is somehow inferior to or less than moral compared to any other culture. In other words, all cultures and all the furniture of all cultures are amoral, basically. They have equal moral merit in terms of comparing them to any other culture. There's no such thing as a cultural that there's no such thing as a culture that contains morally inferior or morally defective furniture, if that makes any sense. I hope that's a pretty clear way of describing it. So
I want to kind of elucidate that even a little bit more. When I was in Israel in 2016, I was with a group of college students. I was getting my master's degree. We were going on it was a 3-week class in Israel. It was awesome. But we were driving through Bethlehem, which is controlled largely by the Palestinian Authority. And as we're driving through Bethlehem, there's people in our bus saying, "Oh, look at how these people live. Oh man, isn't it horrible what Israel has done to them?" And I said, "Well, I don't see any Israelis here. I don't. What do you mean? While they're oppressed, so I think they're choosing to live this way. That's what I think. I don't think it's." Yeah. And I said, "Not all cultures are equal," and they got really offended when I said that, of course. But this is where I think if there's any ability to pierce the armor, it's in this. With multiculturalism, it's in this. It's in this way. The only good thing that Hitler did was become the common example of evil, right? And so we're in the bus, and I said, "No, multiculturalism doesn't work. Not all cultures are created equal, and I can prove it to you with one question." And the kid goes, no, you can't." I said, "Okay, do you think Nazi Germany circa 1939 was just as good of a culture as the United States in 2016? And he didn't have an answer. He couldn't answer that question because it would require him to admit that multiculturalism doesn't work. You can't share the room with Nazis, right? Which is incidentally why they call anybody who disagrees with them Nazis. That's the ironic.
It is ironic. Oh, this is all dripping with irony. You're going to see more irony in some of these definitions here. You just hold your horses there, buddy. You're going to see some. In fact,
speaking of fascism,
we're coming up on one of these hallmarks of ironies. Fascism. Anything you disagree with. A special note, you should attack and suppress what you don't agree with using blind hatred and physical violence so that you can enforce mental acceptance of social justice ideology in society and punish disagreement, thereby avoiding fascism.
The Marxism dripping from the page with that one, because fascism is exactly that. This is projection in its finest sense, right? It's so Antifa, the anti-fascist mobs. They're literally doing fascism. That's right. Literally what they're doing.
That's right. And there was I don't know whether it still exists, but for a while there was an organization called BAM. You ever heard of BAM?
Yeah.
By any means necessary.
Yep.
And it's BAMN, but the M is silent, I guess. And Tucker Carlson was interviewing one of the founders of BAM one time, and they were talking about how by any means necessary means that they are going to bring about this social justice, all these social justice objectives, by any means necessary. And Tucker said, even violence? And they said, even violence. Violence is justified as long as we are accomplishing the objectives of the revolution. And Tucker said, so tell me what's wrong with fascism, because they were trying to, they believed that Western civilization and fascism were the same thing. The Western civilization was essentially fascist. And so Tucker said, tell me what's wrong with fascism. If you're opposing fascism in Western civilization, why do you oppose fascism in Western civilization? You could hear a pin drop because they believed in achieving their objectives through violence.
Yeah.
And suppressing disagreement through violence. And I just had to laugh. I mean, I think I still have that video somewhere, but
that's funny. Yeah. Well, and the deeper irony is the West is what defeated fascism, right? Like, that's what defeated fascism and communism is the West, which is why they're trying to tear it down.
No, don't you ever even suggest that these people should become acquainted with history.
Yeah. Well, because they recreate it, they remake it.
That's right.
The 1619 Project history. That's what they do.
Yep. Okay, what's generosity in the new social justice gospel? Being unselfishly willing to give money stolen from rich white people to those in need.
Yeah, it's
and that's essentially what's happening, because they want redistribution of wealth. They want the rich to pay their fair share, which means they want to take money from the rich people and give it to the people in need. But if you ask them to give their own money to people in need, then you may as well be speaking a foreign language. So being unselfishly willing to give money stolen from rich white people to those in need. That's what generosity is. What is God in social justice ideology? It's social justice. Because social justice is worshipped as though it is God, and it has actually replaced God. So God is no longer a personal being. God is a social project. God is a social objective.
If he is a personal being, he's only somebody who's close to what are considered the oppressed. He is the ultimate social justice warrior, right? He's the archetype.
And by the way, that is something else that's borrowed from Christianity, because there's a sense in which God is close to the brokenhearted. God is the advocate of the oppressed. That's true, but the parameters are completely different. They're absolutely night and day different from each other.
And this is part of the reason why I have called this this shift in culture antichrist or satanic, because what it is it uses the same language and some of the same concepts, and then just distorts it enough, right? It's the same thing Satan does in the garden. Takes a truth and just distorts it just a little bit. Same thing Satan does with Jesus in his temptation. Takes a truth from Scripture and just twists it a little bit to suit his own ends. This is the same thing.
And that's why I said that there are a lot of Christians these days who cannot tell the difference between social justice and the gospel. It's because these things have been borrowed from Christianity and then tweaked just a little bit in order to deceive people into thinking that they're talking about the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so when they read their Bible and they see those words, those are the definitions that are going through their heads. Right. So they read the words and it's a completely different text.
And that's why there's a serious problem in Christianity today, because when you ask someone to define the gospel, what's the gospel? You get one of two responses in a tragic number of cases. The first response you might get is a blank stare. They can't articulate what the gospel is because they're biblically illiterate, yet they call themselves Christians. But the second definition you get is that people who are oppressed will no longer be oppressed, that the people who are oppressing them, that their culture can get torn down in order to end this oppression, in order to create equality. And there are people who actually believe that that's what the gospel is, because it sounds so appealing. Mm-hmm. And especially...
No, go ahead.
Real quick, especially since Jesus talked about freeing the captors, freeing the oppressed and freeing the people who are under captivity, and so it's understandable that it's so easy to confuse social justice with the gospel of the Bible. So, what were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to add to that the fact that part of the problem too is they'll take the event of Jesus' death and resurrection, and they'll twist it even a little bit to say, who killed Jesus? Well, it was the white Romans, right? It was the white Roman governing authorities that killed Jesus, and that's why we should be against these oppressors, because the same oppressors killed Jesus, making Jesus a victim rather than a sacrifice, right? Mm-hmm. And people don't even realize that. They'll make Jesus a victim of oppression and his circumstances, but Jesus said, "No one takes my life; I give it freely." Right? It's a sacrifice so that we might be saved through him. But that's part of that distortion you're talking about. it's almost right. Almost, yes, the Romans killed him. Yes, a lot of the Romans were white. That's not why they killed him. And he's not a victim. He said, I could call down legions of angels and save myself. I'm giving myself for you. So,
and he said, I lay my life down, and I have the authority to lay it down, and I have the authority to pick it up again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And praise God he did.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, here's the Great Commission, according to the New Social Justice Gospel. Go into all the Western world and fiercely attack everything representing Western civilization, decency, and anything you arbitrarily believe is oppressive. Tip: don't think about this long enough to realize your own behavior in this regard is oppressive.
Yeah, well, this is the by any means necessary stuff, right? Like that's
right.
And this also gives people license to lie, to cheat, to be subversive. Remember when the Jussie Smollett thing happened? Remember that? Mm-hmm. Where he pretended like he was part of a race hoax. It was a race hoax. Which everyone knew it was fake as soon as he said in Chicago in the middle of the night, people with MAGA hats on were saying this is MAGA country. like Chicago is this bastion of conservatism.
I know.
Especially in the middle of night in downtown Chicago, right? But the whole point of that was, well, but it speaks to the larger narrative. Who cares if it was true? So all these hate crime hoaxes, they don't care if it's found out to be a hoax. That it actually serves the Great Commission. It gets the word out, right?
Yep.
So I think that's what you're saying here. You can do it by any means. To go into the Western world, to do fake poop swastikas that you do to yourself, to write racist messages to yourself, to I mean, you can just go down the line to the mattress girl at Virginia Tech, the NASCAR driver that quote unquote saw a noose in the. All of those things are part of that Great Commission narrative to go into the Western world, and sometimes they accidentally tell the truth. Like when Black Lives Matter said we're trained Marxists and we want to destroy the nuclear family. Whoops! They accidentally tell the truth, but usually they're pretty good at not doing that.
And they removed that from their website, by the way.
Yes, they did.
But when the whole Jussie Smollett kerfuffle broke out, I put a meme up on Facebook, and this was one of my. I have a lot of original memes, and the meme that I put up was, if racial injustice and oppression is real, why do people have to fabricate examples of it?
Yep. But it's amazing because then it's that you said it's the anti-logic is because then they'll say, well, it doesn't matter. It points to the larger issue. Right. You go, what do you mean the larger issue? You're just admitting that all these things are made up. Oh no, but it's even where I heard one guy say, I can't remember who it was. I don't know if it was Ta-Nehisi Coates or someone else, but say in many ways racism now is worse than in the 1960s because you can't see it. It's ethereal, but it's there.
Yeah. And the demand for racism is higher than it's ever been in the history of this country. Even though I think racism itself is at the lowest point in the history of this country. Mm-hmm. All right, greed. What's greed? First definition: capitalism. Greed is capitalism, and capitalism is greed. 2, wishing to keep the money you have earned. It's greedy. 3, the idea that owning private property is a basic human right and that stealing is immoral. 4, the misguided feeling that compassionate charitable contributions should be voluntary instead of coerced. And 5, the idea that forced charity isn't true charity. Mm-hmm. And what's happening is that the government is trying to address a whole lot of social ills like poverty and that kind of thing. Yeah. And we are actually expected to believe that when the government takes money from people who work hard and earn it and give it to somebody else who needs it, that's charity.
Yeah.
And it's not charity. It's theft. And what I have often done is I've given people an example that let's say that that Josh and I are walking down the street in downtown Denver, and we come across a homeless person who's got a hat out in front of them and they're asking for money. And so what I do is I pull out a gun and I point it at Josh's head and I say, Josh, give me all your money. Give me all the money in your wallet. And so you're all afraid, and you take out your wallet and you give me all your money, and then I give the money to the homeless person. Is that charity? Is that generosity?
And no. People will laugh at that, but that's exactly what taxing people to give. That's exactly what it is. Because if you don't pay your taxes, who comes to get you? People with guns.
Right.
Right.
And and I have been criticized and attacked just 25 different ways a Sunday about this, because
do you know who I think is, and it's not that I dislike him necessarily, but I think he played a huge role in convincing Christians that this was the case. But Tim Keller was notorious for this line of thinking, that his third wayism of saying, the right, they really care about life and they care about liberty. But the left, they care about the poor. And I've always hated that. And I remember talking to a pastor friend of mine who brought that up, and like it was true. And I said, that's wrong. That's completely wrong. And he said, well, really? What do you mean? I said, you don't care about the poor by giving them entitlements.
And do you know what a stimulus package is? A stimulus package is legislated charity.
Yeah, it's a tax on everyone in the future and inflation oriented, and it's going to cost the poor people even more. So the ironic thing about a stimulus package is it does the opposite of what they intended to do. It in 5 years, the poor people are more poor and the rich people are more rich.
And then what happens is that when Republicans or people on the right or conservatives, when they vote against a stimulus package, then the people on the left will say, you see, they're heartless. You see how they lack charity, they lack compassion. They don't have any compassion. If they did, they would have voted for the stimulus package. And I wish that I could write this on the chalkboard like Bart Simpson. And I wish I could just say, it's not the government's job to bail people out of their financial difficulties. It's not the government's job to play wet nurse to people in society. It's not the government's job to give people handouts and to give people charity. It's the people's job to be charitable. Charity is the job of the people. It's the job of the church. It's the job of people of goodwill. Whenever the government gets involved in the charity business, then it destroys everything. It is one of the most evil things in the world for the government to get involved in charity. And yet the government is involved in charity on so many levels that we couldn't even count how many levels there are.
Yeah, and you look at the people who say that, like Bernie Sanders, and then you ask him, or you look at his W-2, his giving, his charitable giving, and it's 1% or less. And it's probably usually to a Democrat super PAC or something for politics.
Right.
Why is that the case? Well, because in their minds, it's not up to them to be generous with their own money. It's up to them to be generous with everyone else's money. And that's true compassion, is to take as much money from other people as possible and give it to other people so that they can garner votes and power.
Yep. And that's why I said generosity is being unselfishly willing to give money stolen from rich white people to those in need. Yeah, no, it's just it's so simple, and it is such a matter of common sense that before we had income tax, and I don't want to spend too much more time on this, but before we had income tax, we didn't have a whole lot of, we didn't have the poverty levels that we have now. Actually, poverty increased when government welfare increased. Mm-hmm. Government welfare actually increases poverty. Then it started to go back down again. But once it starts to go back down to a certain level, it never goes to zero. No matter how many trillions of dollars we have spent on welfare, it does not eliminate welfare. And that's because government force is not the answer to taking care of people in need in society. The answer is generosity among individuals and among organizations, charitable organizations. People took care of each other in the 19th century when we did not have an income tax. People took care of each other.
And do you know what plays a part in that too? Is well, first of all, the church has abdicated that to the government, which is very frustrating in a lot of ways.
Right.
And the second thing is this idea of there's a biblical principle called gleanings that we could really do a lot with as far as charity goes in our society, but we are hampered by this concept of minimum wage. The idea that we have to pay a minimum wage, whereas if you were to not have to pay a minimum wage, you're still going to be in competition for the workforce for good workers, so you're going to pay well. But some people could go and work, and that's part of human dignity, is to be able to work. The reason the war on poverty doesn't work is because we don't understand that dignity is directly tied to effort and work. And so when we have a war on poverty with other people's money, we remove their dignity and we damage the imago Dei, in their lives, and they become entitled because they think they deserve to not have to work.
That's right.
So that's why I'm against minimum wage, but that's not going to change. So.
No, well, minimum wage has such political capital for politicians because it makes them look so good. And when you raise the minimum wage, it makes you popular, so it makes people vote for you, so you're going to keep doing it. But they don't realize that minimum wage actually creates poverty, creates unemployment, creates inflation, because now you're forcing an employer to pay their employees more than what their employees contribute in productivity to the bottom line of your company. And if that's the case, then now you're upside down on how much you're investing in your company versus how much your company is bringing in revenue. So what do you have to do? You have to increase your prices, and you have to lay off certain workers because you can't afford to pay them all the minimum wage. Mm-hmm. So it is such a it's go ahead.
And it's based on this faulty materialistic Marxist idea that the value of the company is derived from the unskilled labor, that they are the ones that give the company value. Right. And to, like the person working the counter at McDonald's, McDonald's wouldn't exist without them. Oh, yes, it would. They would find a way, because the people who are actually invested in making it work are the ones that are going to take the risk to make it work. So, yeah, we don't need to spend more time on that, but I just...
Right. Well, I discussed that at length in the book, Marx Attacks. So if people want to hear more discussion on that, get the book.
Yeah.
All right, what's guilt in the Social Justice Dictionary? Guilt is being white. Pretty simple. And it's the only definition, as this is the only kind of guilt there is. If you're white, you're guilty. If you're guilty, it's because you're white.
Or if you defend the white people. If you
But that's all a part of whiteness.
Oh, absolutely. That's what I try to get people to understand. I was just talking about CRT with ethics class that we're doing on Wednesday nights at our church. And I was trying to get them to understand that when you see critical race theorists use the term white, it's not technically about the color of your skin. It's about it's about the idea of who has power. And so anybody can be white. Asians can be white. Nigerians can be white. If they don't buy into the oppressor framework, they are white.
And that's why they call Larry Elder and Walter Williams and Thomas Sowell and Shelby Steele. That's why they call all those guys Oreos. Yep. Because they're black on the outside and white on the inside. So white is not a color. Just get that through your heads, people. White is not a color. White is an idea. And white is evil. Yeah. So hate. What's hate? Anything you don't agree with. and And I also, one of my favorite memes was that truth sounds like hate to people who hate the truth.
Mm.
And so it is so it's almost laughable that you will hear people talk about, well, this person, we just want to get rid of hate, and this person is out there spewing hate. Well, what they're doing is they're talking about the realities of our culture, the realities of our economy, the realities of our society, and how is it that all these pathologies in society exist, and let's identify the cause of social pathology, and then let's strategize on how to fix it. And when someone tries to articulate that, what they hear is you're out there spewing hate because you're blaming people in society for creating their own problems. And you're identifying social pathologies within certain groups that are the reason for these socioeconomic disparities. And if you do that, then you're just spreading hate. And we don't want hate here. Hate is not a family value, and so on. And the word hate is a absolute vacuous term. It has come to the point where it doesn't mean anything, and it can mean anything that you want it to mean, as long as you can serve a political agenda by using the term.
Yeah. Well, hate becomes disagreement. Like you said, it's this idea that if you disagree with the social justice framework narrative, you are hateful. Full stop. Yep. Like, you just are. You are hateful.
Yep.
And so, and it's the same thing as disunity, right? Like division, causing division. When Kamala Harris says it's a time for a new way forward, which is directly out of the Communist Manifesto, by the way, when she says it's time for a new way forward, and she says we just need to be we need to get back to unity and unified. She doesn't mean that we need to be unified as Americans by a common value of American culture. What she means is we need to be unified, and all the disagreement needs to be shut down. That's what unity is. Right. Don't disagree.
Unity is conformity.
Yeah.
Unity is conformity. Right.
It's Orwellian, is what it is. It's if you disagree, you are part of disunity, and we will achieve unity by shutting you up. Not by, hey, despite our differences, we still are Americans. We're Americans as long as you're quiet.
And some people don't understand why so many millions of people were murdered at the hands of communist regimes in the early 20th century. How could that happen? And the answer is very simple. Political dissidents. Those people were political dissidents. The only way that you can thrive as a totalitarian dictatorship is for everyone to agree with the ideology behind the dictatorship. If people don't agree with it, the whole thing falls apart. And so that's why agreement has to be enforced. You have to enforce agreement to the government sanctioned ideology. And if you don't conform, you're an enemy of the state, and they are morally justified in killing you, in murdering you.
Yeah.
And people just think, people have a hard time wrapping their heads around that, because they think, why would somebody murder somebody else just for their ideas? Well, it actually does happen under this framework. It happens, and it will happen.
People need to know it's in the West already. I mean, people are being jailed in England for their social media posts, right?
Yep.
Thank God for the First Amendment currently as it stands here. Otherwise, that would be happening. Although people were jailed for January 6th without due process.
That's right.
In a lot of ways. But one of the things, so there's a lot of different names that you throw out for Marxism and stuff. And one of the names that people need to know is Mao from China. So one of the things that he did to change the way that, like, communist Russia dealt with dissidents, instead of just sending people to the gulag, right? He did what was called re-education, struggle sessions, where you would have to come in and do a struggle session and then pledge fealty to Chairman Mao and the regime. And that is literally what our corporate overlords do to people that step out of line. The most closely related thing to this that I can think of right now is Jerry Seinfeld, actually. So, like 6 months ago, Jerry Seinfeld said the extreme left is ruining comedy. And about 2 weeks ago, he had a Maoist struggle session where he said, "Oh, I was wrong. That's not really what happens. It's
Yeah.
it's the comedian's job to stay in our lane," which is ironic because that's literally opposite of what a comedian's supposed to do.
That's
The
right.
comedian's supposed to be subversive, irreverent. It's supposed to point out the inconsistencies and the stupid things in culture.
Comedian's supposed to
But
be a rebel.
that was the Maoist struggle session. People don't realize we are doing it right now. The diversity,
And
the DEI training, that's what it is.
that's right. It's re-education. And I have actually heard people like Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama use the word re-education. These people have to be re-educated. We have to change these social and religious worldviews and values. They have to be changed in order to conform to the current agenda. And like you said, they're not hiding it anymore because they don't have to. It has gained so much acceptance now that you don't even have to hide all these things anymore. And it's
Yeah.
pretty much going to be. It's pretty much what people believe.
And people, it's this is why this discussion is so important because it's seeped its way into the church. The book I read, again, The Widening of God's Mercy, it's a full-on Maoist struggle session from Richard Hayes. That's what it is. He goes through. It's ironic because in the book, do you know who that is? He wrote something called The Moral Vision of the New Testament in 1996. Duke theology professor, for people who don't know, and he said that homosexuality is clearly condemned in Scripture. And so years later now, he comes out, and it's crazy because if you read his book, he says, "Oh, I think all of those passages of Scripture still mean what I thought they meant. We just now need to move beyond them to the deeper truth of the deeper logic of Scripture," which is the Maoist struggle session. That's what it is. It's happening in the church. And pastors are falling for it too, and we have to stand up and lovingly point it out.
Yep. We have a church in the Denver area called Highlands Church, and that church is dripping with woke ideology. It's saturated with it, and they have a little poem that they like to recite at the beginning of their services. And part of the poem says, "Gay or straight here, there's no hate here."
Mm.
And the implication is that if you think there's something wrong with being gay, you're hateful, period. And it is such an intellectually bankrupt idea. But people are at a point now where their intellect has just been decimated by this ideology. Whenever you believe in ideology that is designed, or whenever you believe in messages that are designed to erode the rational mind and to evoke an emotional response, a psychological emotional response, something that appeals to primal rage, that what that does is that erodes the ability of the rational mind to even begin to think in logical categories anymore. So when somebody hears gay or straight here, there's no hate here, oh, it sounds great. That sounds good to them. But they have absolutely no concept about how intellectually bankrupt that phrase actually is.
Yeah.
So we need to move on.
That's the yard sign too, right? In this house, we believe love is love, science is real. None of those terms mean anything.
Right.
None of those phrases actually mean anything.
Exactly. Heterosexuality is oppression in the new social justice ideology, in the new social justice glossary, the dictionary. And then humility is another one that's very interesting. The belief that everyone who disagrees with social justice ideology is arrogant and morally inferior to you. 2, the belief that you are automatically more humble than anyone who disagrees with your social justice ideology.
Yeah.
And
humility also takes the route of any white person that has agreed that they are part of the problem. They are now humble. any white person. Now, they're still a part of the problem. They're still racist. It's ironic because you hear Robin DiAngelo talk, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I'm racist," which is a heck of an admission, and I think she's actually right. She is deeply racist, but the the reason she can say that is because she has the humility, right? Because she's imbibed the narrative.
Right. Hypocrisy. The totality of the social justice ideology and almost every single expression of it. Tip. Always fail to recognize this in yourself and learn to be mindlessly and blissfully blind to it. The more you dedicate yourself to social justice ideology, the more natural this will become. And so, speaking of hypocrisy, I think, did I mention on one of our previous episodes about Marx attacks? I think I may have done it in part 2, where Robin DiAngelo has been accused of plagiarizing minorities. And that is just funny. I don't care who you are. That is absolutely hilarious.
It is hilarious. But I'll tell you what. If she truly believes that white people are oppressors and she is a white person, it's par for the course, man. She's just doing what she's all, she's just
exactly.
She's just playing her part.
Exactly. Let's talk about inclusion, because inclusion is a big buzzword in this ideology and in this mind virus. Inclusion, 1, excluding white people, heterosexuals, cisgenders, traditional evangelicals, and those who believe in objective truth from everything about which you wish to be inclusive. 2, inviting people with a diverse range of ideas into dialogue as long as they don't present objective evidence for their convictions. In fact, it would be better if they didn't have any convictions at all. And they don't disagree with you or your fundamental ideology of social justice, in which case they must be excluded in the name of inclusion. See, evangelicals for social action, and that's a big Pandora's box that I don't have time to open right now. But evangelicals for social action is not an evangelical group. There's nothing evangelical about them, but they call themselves evangelical Christians, and they have all sorts of forums and support groups, and white people are not invited to those forums and support groups. Mm-hmm. And if you ask them, why aren't white people invited to these forums? Well, it's because this is a safe space, and they have to feel safe. And if a white person is there, they won't feel safe. Well, why won't they feel safe? Because white people are oppressive. Why do you think that? Because you're racist.
Yep.
You're racist against white people. So, yeah, this is another one of those ironic definitions, but it's the irony is lost on anyone who has been duped into this ideology. Intelligence, a disease for which social justice ideology is the ideal cure. Avoid intelligence at all costs. Jesus, a word devoid of meaning but extremely useful for manipulating others into accepting the new social justice gospel, the new gospel of social justice. The people throw the word Jesus around quite a bit, and by the way, I have heard Jesus referred to from the mouths of a whole lot of politicians who will use Jesus as kind of a token and as a device in order to legitimize what they're trying to push right now, and I don't think that Jesus is probably very happy about it at this point.
Yeah, for those watching, I wrote an article called "The New Cultural Christianity," where I actually break down that progressive Christianity is the new cultural Christianity, and it's based on a new Jesus, and this Jesus is actually the Übermensch. So if you know anything about Nietzsche, that's what this is the ideal man is this man of social justice, is this man of the new gospel. He's the Übermensch. And so when people say, oh, Jesus wouldn't want that, they're not talking about Jesus, the Christ, the Son of the living God. They're talking about this new Übermensch Jesus that they've manufactured out of whole cloth to play cover for all of the ideologies that they want to foist on people.
Right. LGBT. 1. Saints. 2. People who have discovered their true selves in sexual and gender deviance, and who all social justice acolytes fawn over as though they were oppressed, misunderstood, and personally marginalized, when in fact it is only their deviant behavior that is being questioned. I think that's pretty straightforward.
And I'll say, the true victims are the people who are being told that their sin is a virtue.
Right.
So
that's right.
So they're victims, but they're not in the way they think they are.
Right. Yep. Love. 1. Hatred of white people. 2. Stealing money from rich white people and sacrificially giving that money that isn't yours to those in need. That's an act of love. 3. Endorsing the sexual deviance of those you call your friends so that they will remain in bondage to it, which is okay as long as you remain popular because you see it as loving, or because they see you as loving. 4. Encouraging people from other countries to break our morally and biblically sound civil laws so that they can live in our society that is built on the stability of morally and biblically sound civil laws, which you should encourage them to break in the name of love. We need to go over that again?
That's good. That's good. I'm surprised you didn't just put love is love.
Yeah. Privilege. We hear a lot about privilege, white privilege and so on. Privilege is being white. Tip, always ignore the privilege and success of minorities, as this may inspire doubt in the minds of the brainwashed social justice acolytes that all privilege is associated with being white.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this is especially dangerous because I think as Hurricane Helene showed, if you have this definition of privilege in your mind, you might slow walk aid to white people caught in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. Mm-hmm. They didn't. There were a lot of political things that people were saying. Oh, they're doing that so they can win North Carolina. No, there's a recording of the FEMA people saying that they are going to reallocate FEMA funds based on equity, which means
ethnicity.
Which means ethnicity, which means not to poor white people in the Appalachian Mountains.
Yep.
That's why they don't have money.
Yep. That's right. All right, let's move on. Racism. Anything you don't agree with, regardless of whether it has anything to do with race. Racism is now a meaningless... Racism is no longer a word. It's no longer has any meaning. Racism is now simply a weapon. Because if you hate somebody, if you disagree with them, if you don't like their political agenda or their social agenda, if you call them racist, that's all you need. And when other people hear that, and you say somebody's racist, then that automatically discredits them, and it doesn't matter whether they're really racist or not. And I don't even think that most people who are sympathetic to this kind of Marxist ideology and to the mind virus of critical theory, I don't think that any of them would even be able to tell you what racism is if their life depended on it. It's just a word now. Yeah. It's just a weapon.
Well, generally what they say is discrimination based on power dynamics.
Right.
Which is only white people, because they're the only ones that have power. Right. Hegemonic power.
And power based on, or discrimination based on power dynamics has nothing to do with race.
No.
Has nothing to do with skin color.
And discrimination isn't always bad.
That's right. Yeah,
I discriminate against other women because I'm married to my wife.
That's right. And the woman who is looking for someone to babysit her children is going to discriminate against the convicted child molester who wants to apply for the job. Yeah, there's such a thing as rational discrimination, and we talked about this in our last episode. So I'll point people to the previous installment of this, because we'll kind of be covering duplicate ground if we talk about it again. But that's true. Reason for critical theory and for Marxism, reason is purpose-driven activism. Reason is not sitting down and trying to work out a logical argument or a disciplined sequence of ideas that are related in order to arrive at a conclusion. That's not what reason is in this new dictionary. Reason is purpose-driven activism. So if you do something that is going to accomplish the objectives of the Marxist revolution, then you are being reasonable. That's what a reasonable person is. If you are doing something that's going to suppress the actual outcome of the communist revolution or the Marxist revolution or whatever form it takes, then you're unreasonable. You're irrational. You're irrational if you don't subscribe to and if you don't support and endorse the Marxist revolution that they are trying to achieve right now.
Yeah, and for people listening, one of the other words that people use for this is listening. They'll say, "Hey, you need to be quiet and listen or learn. Learn your reason. Learn to go do the activism."
Yeah, right. In the social justice gospel, repentance is publicly declaring you have committed the mortal sin of being white and perpetually hating yourself and apologizing to the world for being white. If you're not white, not applicable. And one of the most appalling scenes that I have seen in the last few years is white Christians putting shackles on themselves and bowing down before minorities that are walking by and apologizing to them for being white. Repenting for being white. That is the most disgusting and demonic things that I have ever seen in my entire miserable life.
Yep.
Revelation, the sudden realization that you are white and therefore automatically despicable racist sinner just because you are white. 2, the sudden realization that if you are not white, you are not a sinner, and every hardship you have ever experienced in your life is due to the malice and racism of white people. That's what revelation is in the new gospel of social justice. Here's what righteousness is. 1, being politically correct. 2, never offending anyone, unless they're historic Christians, no matter what's at stake. Never offending anyone, no matter what's at stake. I missed my parentheses there. 3, hatred and violence against white people, conservatives, Donald Trump, and anyone else you disagree with. You're being righteous if you hate those people. And even if you commit violence against them, you're being even more righteous. 4, willingness to disregard the most cavalier way morally and biblically sound civil laws in order to pretend to have biblical compassion for illegal aliens who have broken morally and biblically sound civil laws and who frequently represent a palpable threat to the safety and well-being of your neighbors the outdated gospel told you to protect. See love.
Yeah, and if you want to see examples of this, just see how people reacted to the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Nowhere else in the history of our country would people have reacted that way.
Right.
And Donald Trump gets a lot wrong, but one thing he gets right is they hate him because they hate you.
Right. They hate him because they hate you, and he's trying to stop you. He's trying to stop them from getting to you.
Mm-hmm.
Saints, all non-white people, of course. Very simple. Salvation, if you're white, not available. If you're not white, not necessary.
Yep.
Satan, The satanic persona takes 5 primary forms. 1, the white race. 2, Donald Trump. 3, America. 4, Western civilization. And 5, capitalism. All those things are evil.
And I would say a synonym to Satan is colonialism. Colonizing. Yeah.
I should add that. I should add that as number 6.
Yeah.
Yep. And I, speaking of colonialism, I get so tired of hearing this trope that's thrown around constantly today. We are a nation of immigrants.
Yeah.
And I just, it makes me just want to vomit whenever I hear that, because it is so ignorant, so ignorant. We are not a nation of immigrants. We are a nation of settlers, and we're a nation of colonists. Colonists and settlers are not immigrants, because the colonists and settlers came to this land before there was a country. If you don't have a country, you don't have immigration. You need a country in order to immigrate into a country.
But that's part of the rewriting of history. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I will say I'm an immigrant. I'm not an immigrant, but I'm only a third generation American. So my grandparents were immigrants. But.
Mm-hmm. And we have immigrants in our country, but we are not a nation of immigrants. That's just simply not true. We're a nation that has immigrants. So, yeah, that's sin, being white. 2, when white people offend someone by telling them the truth, that's a sin. 3, refusing to be politically correct, that's a sin. 4, being racist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, or whatever the phobic du jour is at the moment, regardless of the fact that those who are being accused of being racist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, or whatever the phobic du jour is at the moment, are in fact not racist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, or whatever the phobic du jour is at the moment. 5, believing there is such a thing as objective final truth that is knowable, that's a sin. You're guilty if you do that. 6, following the biblical mandate to the best of your ability to work hard to provide for your own household and avoid being worse than an unbeliever. See greed. So all of those are examples of sin under the social justice gospel. Did you have any comments?
Not really.
On that? There you go. Okay. Truth. Truth is social justice, multiculturalism, gender identity, systemic racism. White people are evil. All white people are privileged, even if they don't have any privilege. Everything that's wrong with society is due to the activity of whites, evangelicals, heterosexuals, and cisgendered people. Note, the truth of the new social justice gospel should be believed exclusively by blind faith, as it has exactly no evidence to support it. Number 2, whatever contributes to the success of the Marxist cultural revolution. That's what truth is. And so truth and reason are 2 very important terms that we need to identify as being redefined, because we will talk about truth and we will hear about truth constantly. I hear about truth from Kamala Harris, and whenever somebody hears her say the word truth, people have no idea that she doesn't mean the same thing that they mean by it in any sense of the word.
Yeah. Well, and Tim Walz, I mean, he's a pathological liar, but he says he's told the truth.
Yeah, because truth is the Marxist agenda. That's what the real truth is. Truth is not petty, like actually saying something that is verifiable and that is actually accurate. And the same thing applies to history. There's no such thing as historical truth anymore. History has been redefined and retooled now in order to serve the new social justice agenda. And so there's no such thing as historical truth. There's only historical, whatever is useful in terms of historical claims. So usefulness has really replaced truth in terms of how this is all shaped in the new social justice ideology.
Which is why lived experience of minorities is truth in cultural Marxism, because it's useful for furthering the objective.
Yep, that's exactly
and
right.
Your lived experience as a white person is not true.
Okay, I keep advancing to the next slide, but I keep going back because there's so I want to give you a chance to say everything about truth that you want to say before I go to the next slide here.
I think we're good.
But you're right, and I should add lived experience and the product of standpoint epistemology to the definition of truth here.
Yeah, but it's only the right standpoint. It's only those who. That's what, like, it's only those who fit the specific mold. Their standpoint's the only one that matters because they're part of the oppressed.
Yep. I just did it again. I keep advancing the slide.
Go for it. It's my truth.
Are you ready? Okay. Yep. Violence. When someone you disagree with proves you wrong, that's violence. You should respond to this fake violence with real physical violence so that you can have the same smug satisfaction that you have successfully opposed fascism.
And people might think that that's ridiculous, but that's exactly what they believe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's no exaggeration. I remember talking about or hearing about somebody who was saying that someone was perpetrating violence on them, and I sat down and I thought to myself, what is it that they are calling violence? And what they were calling violence was exposing there was some economic reality that somebody was exposing, and somebody else was calling it violence. Mm-hmm. And I just thought,
well, you'll be accused of this if you say, actually, the single most important indicator on minority economic hardship is the status of the home, whether or not a father's in the home.
Right.
You'll be accused of perpetuating violence against minority communities because you're suggesting that fathers need to be fathers.
Right. Yeah, and I will get crucified for saying this, but the main reason for social pathology in the black community is children growing up without fathers. Mm-hmm. Because children grow up without fathers at a much, much higher rate in the black community than they do in any other community, any other ethnic group. And that's not because...
you for that, they just need to know that Barack Obama said it first.
That's right.
Because Barack Obama in 2007 said it, until it became no longer politically useful for him in 2011 when he was looking for re-election.
Right. Exactly. Well, that wraps it up for the social justice gospel glossary. And if you have any words that you want to add, then I would absolutely invite you to do that. And my guess is that you probably do. I can think of one that I probably should have put in there, and that is the word woke, because a lot of people are a little confused about what woke means. So you can give me your perspective on what woke is, and it may or may not match what some of the listeners have to say or think about it. But
well, I think woke actually goes back to one of your other definitions, the sudden revelation. Woke is recognizing that all of this is quote unquote true. Woke was recognizing the truth. The truth as defined in this glossary, not the real truth. Right. I think one of the other things, did we talk about diversity? I think that's one of the...
Oh gosh, I can't believe I left that one out.
Yeah, I think that's one of the words, because diversity is a goal, just diversity alone, that's it.
Right. Diversity for its own sake.
Yeah, diversity for its own sake. Now, when people say diversity is our strength, that is meaningless. What does that even mean?
Right.
If you have a room full of people that look differently with their skin color, but they all believe the same, that's not a strength. Like, if they all parrot the same talking points, it's not a strength, but that would be diversity. Diversity is no diversity of thought, only diversity of skin color, and preferably no white people. Diversity does not include white people. That's what people need to realize when they talk about a diverse cast. When they talk about diversity in the college system, they are not saying all sorts of skin colors, including white people. They're saying no, diversity excludes white people.
Right, and it's also it is never about diversity of thought. Mm-hmm. It is only about diversity of skin color. So diversity of ideas and a range of ideas in a free marketplace of ideas, that's frowned upon, because if you have a free marketplace of ideas, that means that somebody could disagree with the social justice ideology, and therefore that's going to suppress the ability of the revolution to actually be successful, to take place.
And that disagreement would usher in fascism.
Right. But when you say diversity, what breaks my heart is that probably one of the most well-known Christian authors in the world, possibly, and I'm not going to name his name because he's a friend of mine, and I have great affection for him, but he actually said that diversity is the basis for our unity in the body of Christ. Mm. And the reason that broke my heart is because that is just nothing more than cultural Marxism being replicated within the Christian worldview and within the Christian circles. And I just thought to myself, wait a minute, I thought that having a common spirit, that it was the Holy Spirit that united us. I thought that it was our love for God and our love for each other, and all these things that the actual New Testament says is the basis for our unity. I've never seen the New Testament talk about diversity. And remember, diversity is skin color. I've never heard about, or multiculturalism. I've never heard the Bible say that is the basis for our unity. Now, we are a diverse body, that's true, but there's nothing in the Bible that says if you don't have a certain degree of diversity in your church, then you are somehow less than spiritual.
Yeah.
And I've actually heard some Christian leaders come out and say, if you don't have diversity in your church, then you're not pleasing to God. You're not doing God's will. You're not as spiritual as the churches that have a big variety of diversity. And my reply to that is, so does that mean that an all-black church is somehow an unspiritual church?
Well, no.
Really? Is that what you're saying? Well, yeah, because
because they have the right diversity. So this is the proof text people use for this is like Acts 2 and Revelation 5 or Revelation 7, right? Where they're like all people of all nations and tongues, but they're all unified under the bride of Christ, right? They're all, and none of that actually has to do, it's actually undoing the Tower of Babel. Acts 2 undoes the Tower of Babel in part, and then Revelation 5 undoes the Tower of Babel in whole. And the whole point of that is that's actually part of the curse, that division amongst people with languages and tongues and along ethnic lines. That division is part of the curse, and it's undone by the bride of Christ. It's not to be diverse. And while diversity is part of it, it is not its goal, right? Like it's the goal is actually this undoing of that division of the Tower of Babel. Right. And so this is where this subtly seeps into our hermeneutic, into our exegesis, and then to our pulpits.
Exactly. And diversity is a property, it's a characteristic of the body of Christ. It's one of the things that possibly can make the body of Christ more interesting, and so that, and it's great. It's great to have diversity. I enjoy diversity. A friend of mine, I was talking to a friend of mine a couple of years ago because I was living in an apartment complex, and my apartment was the bay window of the apartment looked right out over the swimming pool. And one day I looked over the swimming pool, and there were just a few dozen people in the pool, and they were all families. And there was a black family, there was a white family, there was an Asian family, there was a Latino family. There were several families, all of different ethnic background, and they were all enjoying each other. The kids were all playing with the kids from the members of the other families. And when I looked out on that, I said, I sure enjoyed seeing that. And my friend that I described that to said, did it feel like you were seeing heaven? I said, yeah. It looked like heaven to me, but it didn't define heaven. And that's where the confusion lies. And it is a confusion that is so easy to correct if you just simply sit down and think about it with a disciplined mind and with a biblical mind, with the mind of Christ. It is an outcome. It can be a beautiful attribute of the body of Christ and of heaven, but it doesn't define our unity. 100%. Doesn't define heaven. So
yeah, and that's what I mean by it's not the goal. Like it's a result, but it's not the goal. And the goal is unity in Christ. And when you look at that, it's interesting because when you explain that scene, the interesting thing about that is it is actually a shot across the bow of multiculturalism. The reason these people can come together is because they've decided to share in part a common culture, even though they have different skin colors. Now, they might have different traditions that they still have and things like that, but the most important parts of their culture, they've synthesized together, right?
Right.
And so it's the melting pot rather than the pods of different cultures trying to coexist.
Right. And it's also embracing a moral framework that will differentiate one culture from another if one of those cultures does not exhibit that moral framework as well as the other culture does. Yep. So that's another way that it's a shot across the bow of multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is so self-defeating and so incoherent that it's amazing that anybody could ever actually believe that it's a thing. But again, this is not about rationality. It's not about the intellect. It's about accepting a mind virus.
Because you say it's hard to believe multiculturalism is a thing, and like you said, it's all in conflict with each other, because then you have, well, I want to honor these cultures, so I'll partake. It's like, oh no, wait, that's appropriation. You can't appropriate the culture. You can only observe it, right?
Right.
And then the only culture that doesn't have or is not allowed to have its own culture that no one else can appropriate is white culture.
White culture.
You can't have your own white culture, because then you're exhibiting white supremacy. You must, if you're white, you must have no identifying markers as a culture. Now,
right.
I'm kind of fine with that, because I don't want race or skin color to define a culture necessarily. I want values to define a culture. But it's asinine to say I can't. No, I wouldn't look good in it, but I can't wear my hair in dreadlocks because that's cultural appropriation. Or I can't listen to rap music, or I can't eat tacos, or I can't eat tiki masala. Right? Right. You can synthesize those traditions into a culture that has values that are actually better than if we are all siloed in those other cultures. So it's all self-defeating, but that's kind of the point.
And don't these people realize that imitation is the best form of flattery?
No.
So if I wear dreadlocks, rather than appropriating somebody else's culture or insulting it, I'm actually complimenting that culture. I'm honoring that culture because I think that there's something there that's worth imitating.
Yeah.
And
but they have all those sorts of, there's either white flight or gentrification, right? Like it's all meant to put white people in a bind that there's no win. There's no way to win. Like
Right.
you must be torn down and recognize that you're the problem.
Right. Exactly. Well, I appreciate your thoughts tonight, Josh, and I'm glad we were able to overcome the technical difficulties.
Yeah, me too.
Because you're one of those guests that I always learn from every time I have a show, and I feel a little selfish here because I feel like I'm the one who's learning new things and benefiting from the wisdom of my guests, and I feel like I'm benefiting more from them than they are from me. So,
I appreciate I learn stuff when I talk with you too. So it's not a one-way street. You just already know the things that you're teaching me, so it feels like it.
Yeah. Well, I spent a lot of time on this, and I know you have too, and I think it's a worthwhile pursuit because the implications and the ramifications of this are so vast. And I know I'm repeating myself from what we've said in earlier episodes about this subject, but I can't say it often enough that Christians have to be informed about this. They have to understand what's going on, and they have to be able to formulate a response to it. Because if we don't, then we're going to lose our culture even more than we've already lost it. So
yeah. And I think it's important maybe to add with a note of optimism, because this has been, it kind of feels really heavy and pessimistic, which I totally get. And it was going to feel that way because we're going through a glossary of terms that we just simply don't agree with and are ruining parts of our culture. But I think there's two notes of optimism that I would have. One is that we serve a God who is all powerful and all knowing and who wins in the end. And so we don't have to. That doesn't mean we need to abdicate our responsibility for the fight of our neighbors in this moment. That's not true. We don't stand idly by and wait to be rescued. But it does mean that we take solace in the fact that He is the one that's sovereign and control and will bring everything unto Himself, and that's who we serve, and that's the only person we need to please. And so there's hope there. And also, I think there is hope for our culture. I really do. I think there's hope for the United States. I think there's hope for our local churches. I see the tide turning in young people. Even as you talk about things, I think young people are intuitive and start to see these contradictions. We're not built to be illogical. And so part of the problem that the left has right now is they don't have a monopoly on information. The easiest way to do this is if you can control all communication, if you can control all information. And that's why they're trying to wage a war on misinformation and free speech.
Right.
Because kids can get on. Yeah. They're not going to succeed. They're not going to succeed. And so I think there's hope in that, dude. Like, keep speaking out. Keep talking. I saw someone today on Twitter say, what do you do if Kamala wins and she imprisons Trump and they take over the Senate? And I say, I do the same thing I do every day, Pinky. I wake up, I tell the truth, I speak about Jesus, and I see whatever comes. Like that's all I know how to do. And I think the tide can turn. And I actually think it is starting to turn, which is part of the reason why I think this election is so paramount.
Well, and the other thing is that this war against misinformation that the right or that the left is pretending to wage is actually a losing proposition. It's actually impossible. If we were in this fight to this degree 40, 50 years ago, it would be much, much easier to control the information because there were only a few news outlets, only a few news agencies and networks. But now news, the whole concept of news, the whole phenomenon of news has been completely and utterly transformed. It is so dramatically different than what it has ever been like before. And I'm reminded of I think it was Harry Truman who said things are more like they are now than they've ever been before in history. But so it is more difficult now to control the dissemination of information than it has ever been in our history, and I think that's one of the things that is going to be to our advantage in this fight against Marxism, because the Democratic Party and the people on the left and the Marxists that are out there trying to accomplish this revolution, they're not going to be able to control the narrative. They just simply can't, because there are too many mouthpieces out there now. And I actually have heard criticism of the fact that anybody can start a podcast. I mean, even Phil Barrett can start a podcast.
Yep.
And
it terrifies them.
Yeah, and I've heard people talk about that as though it's a bad thing. And I think it's a good thing that Phil Barrett can start a podcast. But I think it's a good thing that anybody can start a podcast, because that way you just cannot control. You can't control the narrative as easily as you can control the rest of it. That's why they're trying to shut down Twitter, and they're trying to make it so that, or X now, that they hate the fact that Elon Musk is trying to make Twitter a forum and a haven of free speech, even though it's not perfect. I mean, it's far from perfect, and mistakes are made. That's true, but it's still a fundamental effort to try to preserve freedom of speech and to try to give people a forum to be able to talk without being suppressed, without being censored. And the government cannot stand that. The leftists in the government can't stand the fact that there are social media platforms that foster free speech. They hate it. They hate it. Yep. The other thing that I wanted to mention before we close real quick, and I'll give you the last word in this too, is that this push against cultural Marxism and critical theory, it's fundamentally all about serving God, and it's serving God in the sense that we are loving our neighbor when we are doing this. And I've always told people that when we fight for our own rights, we're fighting for everybody's rights by default. And when we fight for the truth, we're not just doing that to just stand up and say, hey, I'm right about this. And we're not just out here trying to feed our egos. What we're doing is we're loving our neighbor because we're helping our neighbor become aware of the attacks that are occurring, that are being launched against them personally and against the culture that they love. And I don't care what people say, the United States of America is founded on what I consider to be biblical principles and a biblical worldview. The Imago Dei is a central component of our ideology in the United States, and that's one of the things that makes us unique. And even though there are atheists who don't believe in the Imago Dei and don't have that Christian worldview, they still think that there's something about human beings that gives them dignity, that makes them somehow special, and that for some reason that they have to have individual rights, and that's just part of being human. They just can't explain why. The advantage is that we can explain why that's true, but we can still join forces with people who don't know why that's true but still believe it. And so this is all about loving our neighbor. It's all about helping the people that we love avoid living in a society where human beings are now oppressed. And that's where the true oppression is, and that's the other irony of this whole situation, is that this narrative of oppression, of class oppression, is actually going to be the building blocks of a regime that will be defined by oppression itself. And it is the ultimate oppression. So, to me, I love all these ironies, but that's one of the biggest ones that I actually enjoy, and I really want to help people understand that. So, I'll give you the last word, and then we can sign off.
Thanks for having me, and I agree. I don't want people to be hopeless, because sometimes that leads to inactivity or to just hunkering down and trying to live out your days. The reason we're talking about it is because we are actually hopeful. And I think that's what people need to know is, if we were hopeless, what would be the point of talking about it? But we're hopeful. I think you can still talk about things if you're hopeless, because our hope is not in this world, it's in Christ, but you're still hopeful in that. But I say you don't have to know all the things that we said. You don't have to do all of the study of Marxism and know Hegel's name and Herbert Marcuse's name and Antonio Gramsci, those names. You don't have to know all of their writings and stuff to understand that this is fundamentally flawed and something that we should not abide. And I think that's what I want people to get to. You can do your own study, but you don't have to recognize that this is not biblical, that it is evil, and we can fight back.
Yep. Well, what I'd like to do is, this is part 3 of our Marxism series with Free Thinking Ministries, partnered with Phil Bear, whoever he is. And we may want to do a part 4, and I'm thinking maybe a good thing to do for part 4 is to just simply make it an open mic, and let's co-broadcast it between my channel and Free Thinking Ministries. And because I got a feeling that whenever somebody hears what we just presented tonight, there's going to be a lot of questions and there may be a lot of confusion. And so maybe the next installment should just be, is anybody confused about something? Is anybody finding this hard to believe? Would anybody like some clarification? And are there some questions that you might want to ask? And are you seeing something that's going on in your neighborhood, something that's going on among your coworkers? Do you think that Marxism is behind some of the things that you're seeing in your immediate everyday life? Just questions like that might be a good productive thing to do. And then if nobody asks any questions, then we can get out our musical instruments and just have a jam. So
there you go.
Because I like that. All right. Thank you very much, Josh. You did a great job tonight. And let's keep up the good work. And I'll say good night and so long to everyone watching. And thank you for being with us. Good night.